Hello and welcome back. And we're going to continue our discussion with topic 6 with looking at the triumph of Parliament in Britain. The British are the one exception with these European countries in moving from an absolutist government to more of a representative type government. So let's look at what's going on. Okay. England did develop this path of going from an absolute monarchy, the concept of it, to a constitutional monarchy where rulers have their powers curbed by law, and usually a parliament is going to be in control of the government. Um, the Tudor dynasty, which governed before the Stuarts came to power, they had already developed a tradition of conferring with Parliament. They made sure that they had Parliament support for everything that they did, and so for a century and a half, Parliament was very closely involved with the political life of Britain. They were used frequently. In fact, Elizabeth I called Parliament 14 times, and she's asking for money. And so there was always this relationship that if the monarch asked for money, Parliament had the right to advise the monarch. So it had become custom in England for this to happen. But when Elizabeth first died, she had no children, and so the throne went to her nearest male relative, who was James the Sixth of Scotland. And so the English Parliament invited James to come and be king in England as well. So he becomes King James the First of England. He was a very strong believer in divine right. So he comes into England with this concept that he's the boss, that he is going to call the shots, and he's used to the Scots Parliament doing what he wanted to do. And the English Parliament wasn't quite so accommodating. So he had that problem. He also had a rising group of people in England that were not wanting to conform to the Anglican Church. They wanted to see some things change, and so they became at odds with James because of this. Many of these religious dissenters also were members of Parliament, so it kind of combines the problem, makes it even exacerbates it even more. Okay. Um, James's son Charles continues this pattern of absolute monarchy, and he goes even farther by basically, not listening to Parliament. When Parliament presents him with a petition of right, he signs off on it, then immediately dissolves Parliament and does what he wants to do, and basically alienates these people for the next 11 years. Forcing the religious policies that his father had developed, making Puritans come to his church and do the things that he was supposed to do. So a lot of them started to migrate to the Americas in this time period. This all comes to a head for Charles, though, when Scotland, who really disagrees with his religious policies, rebels against Charles. Charles needs money, so he calls Parliament back into session. And Parliament this time is going to want some change. So they're tired of the situation in England. They want more of a voice and more of a say, and Charles doesn't want anything to do with it. And so he tries to arrest some leaders of Parliament in 1642. He's violating a lot of traditions at this point. And so when he shows up with soldiers to arrest members of Parliament, the people in Parliament say, okay, we've got to do something about this. And so this is what starts the English Civil War, which was a very devastating war for England. It split families. While there are some basic geographical areas that tended to support either the king or Parliament, basically this split along family lines with brothers fighting on opposite sides. The Royalists or the Cavaliers versus the Parliamentarians, the Roundheads. Charles was at a disadvantage because being on an island, he was isolated from the rest of Europe, and the British Navy, the English Navy, sided with Parliament. So it was just really a matter of time, because he didn't have the resources. Also, Parliament was led by a man named Oliver Cromwell, who was an extremely capable general, and this ultimately led to Charles's defeat. Charles was actually put on trial because he was conspiring with other countries to try to get back on the throne. So he was tried for treason and actually executed. So this is the first time in history that a monarch was tried by his own people and actually publicly executed as a result of that crime. The next 11 years were where there was no king. England was actually a republic. It was called Commonwealth, and Oliver Cromwell was the leader of this republic. He actually was given the title Lord Protector. Ultimately, he even governed just as absolutely as Charles ever did. But they abolished the monarchy, the House of Lords, and the Church of England. So for 11 years, things were kind of turned around in England. But but Cromwell wasn't as effective a ruler as he should have been, and people didn't like his absolutist tendencies, and so people, being very traditional, wanted to have their king back. So when Cromwell died, they actually invited the monarchy to come back, and this was called the Restoration, where Charles the first son, Charles II, comes back, and he reassumes the throne, and things kind of go back to normal. Charles believed very much in the idea of divine right, but he also saw that Parliament had executed his father, so he played along. He didn't let his true feelings show. Um, in fact, the writ of habeas corpus, the idea that a person can't be arrested and held without charges, actually comes into legal force under Charles I. And he accepted the petition of right. He accepted that kings had to be play by the rules. And so he kind of laid the groundwork for what was going to come later. Um, Charles's brother James becomes king after him, and he's not quite as politically uh, correct. He's openly Catholic, and he is starting to enforce some of the things that people in England don't like pro-Catholic policies. And so he's forced to abdicate. So he and his son are forced to flee to France, and Parliament invites his older daughter Mary and her husband to come and be the King and Queen of England. It's called the Glorious Revolution, and this is really where you see Parliament step up and become the dominant political force in English politics, and the monarchs start to take a back seat. Um, they passed the English Bill of Rights, which effectively takes away the power of kings to do whatever they want to do. It says that even monarchs have to obey the law. And this is really where you start to see the concept of a limited monarchy being created in England. Um, you start to see what we will call a constitutional monarchy develop. So the idea is that the power of government was defined and limited by law. Kings had limits. You start to see the developments of political parties with the Whigs and the Tories, depending upon whether they favored a stronger king or a stronger parliament. You see the development of the cabinet, who served as advisors to the monarch, and the head cabinet member, the prime minister, which ultimately evolved into being the head of the state in the British government. It's important to note, though, that this is not democracy. Most people could not vote. Most people still could not participate, but you had a fairly large minority of people that were making these decisions in Britain. It was really more of an oligarchy, but landowners could vote and could participate. So that was an idea that they took with them to their colonies in Britain. We'll talk a little bit more about that in lesson 5. So anyway, this concludes lesson 3. We'll be looking at some pictures and discussing things in a little bit more detail in class. But I will see you back when we come to lesson 4 and talk about the Enlightenment. Okay, so thank you.